My true story from Montana. My daughter texted me, "You weren't invited to the party, my husband doesn't want you there," but I sent one message and half the guests walked out with me. "Mom, it's not that we don't love you, it's just, Ryan wants a certain crowd at the party, it's a modern theme, upscale. You showing up in that handmade sweater would ruin the aesthetic." I stared at the message, the words blurring slightly as the afternoon light flickered through my kitchen window. My hand was still holding the crochet hook, the last stitch half formed in the yarn I had picked out for my granddaughter's birthday, a soft rose pink, just like the one she wore in the picture I took last Christmas when she sat in my lap tracing the pattern of her sweater and whispering, "Grandma, it's warm like hugs." That was before the parties, before the galleries, before Ryan. I set the yarn down gently, as though any sudden movement might snap something inside me. I read the text again, "would ruin the aesthetic," as if I were a stain. As if I, the woman who once fed her from a chipped porcelain bowl, was now the mismatch in a carefully curated life. It took me a full minute to breathe again. I have lived in Montana my whole life, born between pines, raised among valleys that teach you patience. I met my husband in a snowstorm. He taught high school shop class. I sold hand-knit scarves in winter markets. We were not wealthy, but we were warm. And every stitch I've ever made has come from that place, where necessity meets love. When we were young, I made sweaters for the ranchers' children. They called them mountain coats. I embroidered their initials on the sleeves and stitched hope into every seam. My work won ribbons at the county fair. I once had an article written about me in the local paper, the Yarn Whisperer of Flathead County. People said I could turn wool into memory. And when my husband passed, those memories were what kept me going. My daughter, Clare, was my reason. I raised her alone. Worked 2 jobs, mornings cleaning motel rooms, nights knitting by lamplight for online orders. She wore handmade dresses to school, carried crocheted backpacks with animal faces. She hated them sometimes, sure. She once cried because another girl had a Barbie lunchbox and she had one with hand-sewn flowers. But she never went cold, and she never went hungry. I paid for her college with yarn and blisters. Every check, every sale, every winter craft market, we saved every dime. When she got her acceptance letter, she cried into my shoulder and said, "I'll make you proud." I thought she did. She moved to the city, studied art history, met Ryan at a gallery event. He was polished, charming, said all the right things. I remember the first time he came to visit. They stayed for exactly 2 nights and didn't touch a single slice of the apple pie I baked. He brought wine, I served tea. He wore suede shoes in the middle of mud season. Claire began to change after that. At first, subtly. Calls grew shorter. Visits became photo ops. My gifts, sweaters, scarves, handmade doll clothes for my granddaughter, stopped appearing in pictures. I'd ask about them, and she'd say, "Oh, it didn't fit the mood this time." Now there was a party, a modern, upscale birthday party for a 5-year-old girl who once called me her cozy grandma. And I was not invited. Not because of something I said, not because of some mistake, but because of my sweater, because I was a handmade woman in a prefabricated world. I looked around my kitchen. The stove I cooked on for 30 years. The chair my husband fixed 3 times before cancer took his hands. The yarn basket beside the fireplace, half full, still hopeful. I wasn't angry, not yet. Hurt, yes, but anger comes later, after the hurt has hardened into something less breakable. I picked up the sweater again, the one I was making for my granddaughter. It was almost finished, just a few rows left. I held it against my chest and breathed in the scent of the wool. It smelled like comfort, like time, like everything I had ever poured into her life, and now I was off-grand. I folded it gently and set it in my cedar chest, not discarded, not destroyed, just waiting. Because I wasn't finished yet, not with the sweater, and not with this story. It did not start with the party. No, the unraveling had begun long before that, and like most unravelings, it started subtly, just one misstitch at a time. The first time I noticed it, I brushed it off. Claire had forgotten to tell me about Lily's school open house. I found out from a neighbor whose grandson was in the same class. When I asked Claire about it, she blinked like she had genuinely forgotten. "Oh, Mom, it was so chaotic that week. Ryan had a conference, and I had to prep a gallery brunch. It was just exhausting. She said she'd bring me pictures. She didn't. The next was a birthday card, Lily's third. I had spent 2 weeks making a picture book from yarn scraps, tiny felt pages that told the story of Lily and the mountain fox. Each animal had a name. Each page had a secret pocket for her to find. I mailed it with tracking, wrapped in brown paper, tied with ribbon. I never saw it again. When I asked if Lily liked it, Claire texted, "Oh, yes, I think so. Ryan said it might be too delicate for her age. We might keep it as a keepsake." The photos from the birthday party showed Lily opening a box of store-bought toys, each more plastic than the last. I wasn't in any of the photos. Claire posted them online with the caption, "Everything curated, everything perfect." I started noticing the patterns. Photos of Lily at ballet class, at museums, at themed parties. Claire and Ryan front and center, smiling like the cover of a lifestyle blog. Her captions full of hashtags, aesthetic, curated childhood, elevated living. I used to be part of those captions. Now I was just part of the archive. She stopped posting pictures of the quilt I made for Lily's crib, the hand-stitched growth chart with tiny buttons, the lavender-scented toys I sewed from old cotton shirts. When I once commented on a photo, just a simple, "She's growing so fast, Grandma loves you," the comment disappeared an hour later. I asked Claire, gently, why. Her response, "Oh, Mom, I'm trying to keep a cohesive feed. You know how social works now. Don't take it personally." A cohesive feed. As if my love didn't match the brand she was building. At first, I tried to adjust. I stopped posting photos of my crafts with Lily's name. I limited my comments. I tried to stay in my lane, as she once put it, when I mailed a letter to Lily's preschool teacher without asking. She called and said, "Mom, I appreciate the intention, but it's important that Ryan and I shape her narrative. We're trying to keep things intentional." Shape her narrative. She was 4. The last time I visited their house, I brought cookies, the same oatmeal chocolate chip recipe Claire used to beg for as a teenager. I walked in and was greeted by Ryan with a stiff nod. No hug, no eye contact. He looked past me as if he were checking to see if I'd brought someone else. Claire took the cookies and smiled. But that smile? It was brief, plastic, and expired by the time it reached her cheeks. They served espresso from a chrome machine that looked like it belonged in a showroom. Their kitchen smelled of imported oils and scented candles, not cinnamon or sugar. Everything was white, sterile, not a single child's drawing on the fridge, not a single thing handmade. Lily came running in wearing a tiny trench coat and shoes that cost more than my entire pantry. She hugged me, fiercely. That night, she asked if I would tuck her in. I said yes, of course I would. I read her the fox story again, from memory, because the book I made was in storage. She fell asleep with her hand wrapped around my finger. The next morning, Claire told me that Ryan had concerns about bedtime routines and boundaries, that they wanted to create consistency. I was asked not to read to Lily at night anymore, not without permission, not unless it was a book they provided. I left early. From then on, everything changed. Invitations stopped. Phone calls shortened. My name was mentioned less and less. I became something to manage, to regulate. "Mom, maybe you don't need to bring handmade things every time." "Mom, it's okay if you skip this one. We've got so many people coming." "Mom, just enjoy your peaceful life up there, okay? Let us handle the rest." I was no longer a mother. I was no longer a grandmother. I was a sweet lady in the mountains who needed to stay quaint, quiet, and out of the photos. And Ryan, he no longer even tried. At first, he said hello. Then he nodded. Then nothing at all. One visit, he passed me the salt without making eye contact. Another time, he opened the door, saw me, and said, "Claire's in the back," before walking away. He had erased me without ever needing to argue. He did not need to raise his voice. He just needed to lower his gaze until I no longer existed. And Claire? She followed, willingly, quietly, elegantly. It was not sudden. It was slow, like watching a quilt fray thread by thread until you are holding only scraps and wondering where the warmth went. Until the party, until that text, until the final stitch snapped. It was a Thursday evening when it happened. I was scrolling through my phone, not for anything in particular, just passing time before the kettle sang. The living room was quiet, save for the creak of the wood stove expanding in the cold. I had just finished folding a batch of dishcloths I had crocheted for the church pantry. And then I saw it. Clare had posted new photos. It was a carousel of images from a photo shoot with Lily. Outdoors, golden light, expensive camera filters. Lily stood in front of a white fence, smiling just the way she used to on my porch steps. Her cheeks rosy, her arms outstretched. And she was wearing my sweater. Not just any sweater. It was the one I made last fall. Soft lavender wool, tiny daisies embroidered around the collar, with a single wooden button I carved from the birch tree that once stood in our backyard. I remembered every stitch. I remembered Lily's face when she tried it on, how she twirled in it and said, "I look like spring, Grandma." I leaned closer to the screen. But the caption stopped my breath cold. A timeless piece, custom from Paris. Custom from Paris. I blinked, read it again, and suddenly it was not just the sweater that unraveled. It was me. It was not the lie that hurt the most, it was the theft. The rewriting of truth so easily, so casually, as though my hands and my hours and my heart had never existed, as though warmth, real warmth, could be bought in a boutique or filtered through a hashtag. She had erased me. Not with cruelty, but with convenience. The photo had over 400 likes. Compliments poured in. "So chic. Parisian babies are the cutest. Your daughter has such great taste." Not a single soul knew that the hands who made that sweater had bled once threading that daisy needle. That I had picked that shade of lavender because Lily once said purple made her feel like a fairy. They did not see the hours, the warmth, the care. And maybe they never. I set the phone down, carefully, as if it might explode. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out my old ledger. It was a worn notebook, blue cover, frayed corners, thick with time. Inside were entries, dated and scribbled, tracking every single thing I had ever made for Lily. February 3, 2018, yellow duckling hat, size newborn. June 12, 2019. Blanket with pine tree embroidery, backed in flannel. October 1, 2020, fox plushie with one ear bent. December 15, 2021, first Christmas dress, red cable knit with snowflake trim. March 4, 2022, lavender sweater with daisies and birch button. I turned each page slowly, tracing my own handwriting with my finger, as if to remind myself that I had existed in her life. Each item had a note next to it. Wore it to Sunday school, smiled all day, refused to sleep without it for 2 weeks. Called it her magic fox. They were not just clothes, they were memories, and now they were being repackaged, stripped of soul, sold for style points. I closed the notebook gently and sat in silence for a long while. The stove crackled, the tea cooled, but I did not move, because something had shifted inside me. Not anger, not even grief, just a clarity I had not felt in years. I was no longer just unwelcome. I was inconvenient to the narrative. And inconvenient things, they get cropped out. But not this time. Not anymore. I waited 3 days. 3 days after the Instagram post, 3 days after seeing Lily in the sweater I made, described as if it had come from a Paris showroom instead of my quiet kitchen. I told myself maybe Claire had not meant to lie. Maybe the caption was for marketing. Maybe it was just careless. But deep down I knew better. Still, I needed to hear her voice, so I called. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hi, Mom," she said, breezy, distracted. I could hear ambient music in the background, soft piano chords, the clink of glass, like she was somewhere polished. I swallowed. "Claire, I saw the pictures of Lily." A pause. "Oh, did you like them?" "She looked beautiful," I said. "The sweater looked good on her." Another pause, this one tighter. "Yes. That one." There was no mention of where it came from, no apology, not even acknowledgement. I waited. Then I asked, gently, "Claire, are you really not inviting me to the party?" She exhaled sharply, like I had asked something exhausting. "Mom, it's not that we do not love you." My hand tightened around the phone. "It's just, the event has a certain flow, aesthetic. You know how Ryan is about energy and presentation. We're hosting it in the gallery space this year. Minimalist, clean, modern. There's a vision. The decor, the lighting, the outfits. You showing up in one of your sweaters would confuse things. I stared out the window. Montana snow was starting to fall again, soft and slow, dusting the bare pine branches. My world was white, quiet, true. Confuse things? I asked. She hesitated. Mom, people come to these events for a certain feel. It's more than just a birthday party. It's also about the brand, the experience. I'm not a brand, I said softly. There was another long pause. Then her voice changed, sharper now. Mom, don't do this. Don't make this about guilt. This is about direction. Ryan and I are building something. We're trying to move forward. People don't go to galleries to look at wool scarves anymore. That's just not where the world is. I didn't speak, because there was nothing left to say. It was not about the sweater. It was not about a party. It was about erasure. It was about cutting away anything that did not fit the version of herself she was curating for strangers, including me. Claire, I said finally, my voice trembling despite my efforts. Do you really not want me there? There was a beat of silence. Then she said it. Mom, please don't ruin this. People are coming for something beautiful. They're not expecting to see fleece and folk stories. My heart slowed. She might as well have said it outright. You're the past. You don't belong here. I nodded, though she could not see me. I understand. Okay, she said quickly, almost relieved. Thank you for being mature about it. I knew you'd get it. I didn't get it. But I ended the call. And when I set the phone down, it was like every vein in my body froze. The warmth of 3 decades of sacrifice, of motherhood, of bedtime lullabies and scraped knees and handmade meals, iced over in a single conversation. I sat in my chair and stared at the fire for a long time. Not crying, just quiet. Because when the blood stops flowing between mother and child, it is not loud. It is a silence so vast it echoes. That night, I could not sleep. The wind whispered against the window panes. The wood stove glowed faintly, casting orange light across the walls. I sat at the kitchen table in my thick robe, a mug of cold tea in front of me, untouched. The house was so still, I could hear the clock ticking above the sink. I kept hearing her words. Don't ruin this. They're not expecting to see fleece and folk stories. I stood up, crossed the room, and opened the bottom drawer of the old cabinet where I kept the family photo books. There was one album, covered in blue flannel, that had not been opened in years. I flipped through the pages until I found it, a photo. It was Lily, maybe 3 years old, standing in front of the stone fireplace in my living room. Her cheeks were pink from playing outside, her curls wild with static. She wore the lavender sweater I had made, the very first one with the daisy chain collar. She was laughing, not posing, not filtered, just laughing with her whole face. In the background, a stack of logs glowed in the firelight. A half-finished puzzle lay on the rug. The mug in her hand was full of cocoa, with marshmallows melting around the rim. It was a picture of warmth, a picture of love, and no one could fake it. I sat back down and stared at the photo, holding it in my lap. The longer I looked at it, the more sure I became. Claire could crop me out of her life, but I still had a voice. So I picked up my phone, not to message her, to message them. People who had known Lily before the marble countertops and gallery invites. People who had eaten my cookies, sat on my porch, shared snow days and casseroles and Sunday afternoons. I opened a group text. One by one I added names. Mrs. Halpern, Lily's first preschool teacher. Tom and Janine, the neighbors who helped shovel my walk. Mrs. Engun, who used to knit with me at the community center. Clara, whose daughter was in ballet with Lily. Even Margaret, who once helped me fix a broken stroller wheel. 18 people in total. I did not ask them to take sides. I did not complain. I simply attached the photo and typed, "This is the child I raised. This is the warmth I gave. If that's off-brand, I understand." I stared at the message for a moment, my thumb hovering. Then I pressed send, and in that instant, something inside me shifted, not in anger, but in freedom. I had told the truth. Not loud, but loud enough for those who remembered. The first reply came 5 minutes later. Mrs. Halpern. She wore that sweater every Wednesday, said it made her brave. Then Janine. Still remember the cocoa you made that day. Nothing in the world like it. Clara. I've missed seeing her like that. Thank you for sharing. By midnight, 10 of the 18 had responded, each message like a soft hand on my shoulder. No one needed an explanation. They had been there, they remembered, they knew. The gallery was pristine, white walls, polished floors, and soft ambient lighting that seemed designed more for illusion than warmth. Long banquet tables stretched the length of the room, covered in linen so smooth it looked untouched by real hands. The chairs were ghost-clear acrylic, like they belonged in a furniture catalog, not a child's birthday. At the far end stood a massive printed photograph of Lily, arms outstretched, framed by golden light, her laugh frozen in high resolution. She wore a ruffled white dress and gold ballet flats, not a speck of mud, not a hint of mischief, just curated perfection. The guests arrived slowly in coats of camel and black, murmuring greetings, holding wine glasses instead of juice boxes. There were canapes on silver trays, figs wrapped in prosciutto, smoked salmon on cucumber rounds. The cake stood untouched, 3 tiers tall, iced in blush fondant, topped with edible flowers flown in from somewhere far away. Clare greeted everyone with grace, her hair swept into a low bun, her dress sleek and structureless. Ryan hovered nearby, shaking hands, offering tours of the event installation along the back wall. A looping slideshow of Lily's most aesthetic moments, gallery visits, tea parties, trips to botanical gardens. There were no photos of Lily covered in mud, none with spaghetti sauce on her chin, none in the sweater I made. They had written me out of the gallery just as cleanly as they had written me out of the guest list. But something else was happening, something subtle. It began when Clara arrived. She was wearing a long scarf, knitted, old-fashioned, one I had made her 2 Christmases ago. She hugged Clare politely, nodded to Ryan, then glanced once at the slideshow and walked away. She sat at a table near the back, checking her phone. Then came Janine. She looked around the gallery, said hello, smiled at Lily, but her eyes flicked toward the empty chairs. She sat next to Clara. Mrs. Halpern arrived third. She took 1 step into the gallery, saw the photos, saw Ryan's fixed smile, and paused. "Excuse me," she said softly, to no one in particular. "I think I have a prior appointment." She turned and walked out. One of the waiters glanced at Ryan, confused. Ryan forced a laugh, too loud, and said, "I guess she forgot we upgraded the dress code." But the laughter didn't catch. By now, 5 guests had slipped away quietly. Then, a 6th. A woman tapped Claire on the arm and murmured, "Sorry, dear, I promised to drop something off for Geneva. Hope Lily has a lovely day." Claire's face twitched, but she nodded, and then it kept happening, one by one. They did not make a scene, they did not raise their voices, they simply stood, offered vague excuses, errands, children to check on, soup on the stove, and walked out of the room. Ryan's jaw tightened. Claire clutched her champagne glass just a little too hard. "Something's going on," she whispered to him. He scanned the crowd. The spaces were growing, tables half-filled, conversations thinning. Lily was at the center, spinning slowly in her dress, not understanding why the people she loved were leaving one by one. Claire called after one couple, "Is everything okay?" They smiled politely. "We just remembered something more important." By the time the slideshow reached the 7th loop, nearly half the guests were gone. Ryan looked like a man watching a deal fall apart. Claire was pale. No one had said my name, but I was in the room nonetheless. In their minds, in their memories, in every person who had once sat at my table, eaten my soup, warmed their hands with cocoa while Lily napped on my chest. I had sent 1 photo, 1 message, and that was enough. Because truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be felt. The house smelled like cinnamon and clove. I had woken early that morning, knowing I would not be at the gallery. I did not have anywhere to be, and yet my hands moved with purpose. I kneaded the dough slowly, rolled it thin, filled it with brown sugar and pecans. I set the kettle to boil. I sliced apples for the pie, whipped cream by hand, dusted the table with a bit of flour like snowfall. No cameras, no hashtags, just quiet, just care. The wood stove crackled behind me. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving a soft white layer over the porch railings. I looked out the window, wondering what the gallery must look like. Fluorescent lights, mirrored walls, a little girl trying to smile while the room around her thinned out like air at altitude. Then I heard it. A knock. gentle, not hurried. I opened the door and found Miss Halpern standing there, her long wool coat dusted with snow, eyes kind. She didn't say much, just held up a small box wrapped in gingham paper. "Thought you might want this back," she said. Inside was the felt storybook I'd made years ago. "I found it in the free bin outside the community center." I swallowed hard and stepped aside. "Come in. Tea's ready." She nodded once and entered. 20 minutes later there was another knock. Janine. She brought her husband Tom and a small thermos of mulled wine. "We didn't feel like staying," she said simply. Then came Clara and her daughter, then 2 of the parents from Lily's preschool, then Margaret, with a fresh loaf of rye bread and her hands in mittens I had made for her 4 winters ago. We didn't speak of the gallery. No one asked what Clare had said. No one brought up Ryan. We sat around the table, the fire warming our backs, the tea steaming in mismatched mugs I'd collected over years of yard sales and birthdays. We passed slices of pie, broke cookies in half, and let silence sit with us like an old friend. Someone mentioned Lily's laugh. Someone else remembered how she once tried to help me stir biscuit dough and spilled half the flour on the floor. Everyone laughed, and I sat there, listening. Not speaking much, just watching the room fill. Not with decor, not with lighting, but with memory, with truth, with people who had chosen warmth over walls. At one point someone said softly, This feels more like a birthday party," and we all knew what she meant. No curated photos, no luxury candles, just hands that made, eyes that saw, hearts that remembered. I brought out the sweater, the lavender one, the one with daisies at the collar. I passed it around. Each person touched it like something sacred. They remembered. Not just the stitch, but the story, the girl, the woman behind it, me. And in that small house in Montana, surrounded by firelight and friends, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride, not vengeance, but peace. The morning after the party, the snow had hardened into a quiet crust. It was the kind that blanketed everything in stillness, where even the trees seemed to be holding their breath. I moved slowly through the house, the floorboards creaking under the weight of old wood and older memories. I made my tea the same way I always had, loose leaves, boiled water, no sugar. I set it on the windowsill and watched the sky begin to brighten, pale and cold. And then I reached for the photograph. It was tucked in the bottom drawer of my sideboard, wrapped in an old scarf that still carried the scent of cedar and thyme. I unwrapped it carefully as if it might break, though I knew what truly might break was me. Lily, 3 years old, standing in front of the fireplace, wrapped in the lavender sweater with the daisy collar. Her arms were open wide, like she was about to take off, her cheeks flushed from the heat of the fire, her hair curling around her face in soft spirals, wild and honest. And her smile, unfiltered, unposed, untouched by anything curated, just joy, pure, unshaped joy. The kind you do not get from a camera setting or a caption. The kind you earn through hours of quiet, of presence, of putting the child first before the world had a chance to shape her into something else. I wiped the glass with my sleeve, careful not to smudge the corner where the light caught her eye. Then I walked to the fireplace and hung it back where it had always belonged, centered, just above the mantel, just below the place where the ceiling cracked a little in winter. Clare had taken it down years ago when she last stayed here, said it looked too rustic, that it did not match the new aesthetic of her life. But now it was back, and next to it I pinned a small piece of cardstock, cream-colored, edges trimmed with pinking shears. I wrote on it, slowly, with the same fountain pen I had used to sign every school permission slip and every birthday card. Love isn't curated, it's handmade. I stepped back, looked at the photo, the sweater, the glow. That felt right. Not dramatic, not bitter, just true. Not a monument, just a reminder of what mattered, of what endured. I sat down in my old armchair, the one with the cushion that had molded to the shape of my spine, the one where I had stitched the very collar Lily now wore in that photo. My hands rested in my lap. The yarn still sat in the basket beside me, half spun into something new. The fire in the stove whispered like an old friend, telling me I had done the right thing. The warmth inside my house didn't come from the thermostat. It came from knowing I had never been absent, only hidden, by someone else's story. And then, without really planning to, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled a sheet of paper from the drawer, took a breath, and I began to write. A letter. To Clare. No anger, no blame, no tally of wrongs, just truth. I told her I remembered. Every sleepless night she cried as a baby. How I rocked her in the crook of my arm while the wind howled outside our cabin. How I mended her favorite blanket when it tore, and she sobbed like the sky had split. How I sewed her Halloween costumes, even when I was too tired to see straight, because I wanted her to feel like magic. I reminded her of the soup I used to make when she was sick. How I never let the fire go out in winter. How I saved every single crayon drawing she made and taped them to the fridge like they were rare museum pieces. And then I told her that Lily had been mine first, not in the way courts or hospitals define it, but in the way time defines it, in the way that only lullabies sung in the dark and mittens pulled over tiny hands and stories whispered into sleepy ears can define it. I told her that just because I had not been part of her pictures did not mean I had not been part of her story, and just because she chose to curate her world without me did not mean I had not lived in it. At the end of the letter I wrote only this: I'll always knit warmth, whether you wear it or not. I folded the letter in thirds, slipped it into an envelope, sealed it. Then I placed it on the small hallway table next to the basket where I kept outgoing mail. I stood there for a moment, looking at it, wondering if I'd ever send it, wondering if I even needed to. Maybe it would stay there forever, a weightless thing in a quiet hallway. A record, a heartbeat, a line in the sand. Or maybe one day I'd drop it in the mailbox, maybe. But whether she ever read it or not didn't matter, because I had written it. I had said the words. And sometimes that is enough, because love, real love, does not perform. It does not parade or pose or caption itself for others. Real love is handmade. It's late nights and quiet mornings. It's stitches you make and never undo. It's the kind of presence that doesn't need to be seen to be felt. And in the stillness of my home, fire crackling, photo hanging, kettle humming its soft song, I knew that everything that mattered still lived here. Not in a gallery, but in this room, in this sweater, in this story, and in the love that shaped it all, whether the world saw it or not. Spring came late that year. Montana winters tend to overstay their welcome, like an old ache that flares up even when the calendar insists you should feel better by now. But one morning I opened the door and smelled thaw. The snow had melted into the soil, and small green shoots peeked through the patch near the mailbox. The creek behind the house, frozen for months, had begun to babble again. You learn to recognize these signs, living here long enough. Not all changes come with thunder. Some just start dripping, quietly. It was a Thursday when the envelope disappeared from the hall table. I hadn't planned to mail the letter to Clare. I'd told myself the words were for me, that I didn't need her to see them, but maybe some part of me did. I had left the envelope by the door for weeks, then one morning I walked it to the mailbox without thinking. I tucked it between a seed catalog and a flyer for roofing services and closed the rusted metal door. No ceremony, just letting it go. What happened next wasn't immediate. No text, no call. But 5 days later, a package arrived. It was small and brown, the handwriting on the label oddly familiar but stiff, like someone trying to write neatly after years of typing. My name, my address, nothing else. I opened it carefully, heart tapping uncertain beats against my ribs. Inside was the sweater, the lavender one, folded neatly, and on top of it, a note, not long, just a few lines. She wears it every night now, refuses to sleep without it, says it smells like home. I think maybe I forgot what that meant. Thank you, Clare. No apology, but something softer than that, something closer to acknowledgement. I'd held the sweater for a long time, brought it to my face. It smelled faintly of lily, of shampoo, crayons, and something sweet. I smiled, tucked it back into the box, didn't reply. Not yet. Let her sit with it. Let her feel the weight of what she had almost erased. Over the next few weeks, other small things followed. A photograph slipped into my mailbox, Lily standing in a park, holding a handmade stuffed fox I'd thought had been thrown away. No caption, just the image. Then a voicemail I let go to the machine. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Hope the snow's melted up there. Lily asked if we could visit sometime. No pressure." Still no apology. Still no declarations. But the ice was thawing, and that was enough. Not every bridge needs rebuilding. Some just need to stop burning. I spent that spring doing what I always did. Baking, knitting, walking the trails behind the house. Evelyn from down the road stopped by with jam. I made her tea. We didn't talk about Clare. We didn't need to. Sometimes, the people who really love you don't need to know every detail to hold space for your healing. One Sunday afternoon, I pulled out my old ledger again, the one where I tracked everything I'd made for Lily over the years. I flipped to the most recent page and added a new entry. April 28, 2025, Fox plushie repaired, sent by mail. Lily's still carrying it. That's enough. I set the book down and stared out the window. Sunlight hit the side of the barn, painting it gold. I didn't know if Clare and I would ever return to what we once were, but I no longer needed us to. I had already stitched every part of myself into the fabric of her life, into Lily's. Whether they wore it proudly or buried it in closets didn't change the truth of it. What's made with love cannot be unmade by neglect. What's true remains, even if unspoken. That summer, Lily came to visit, just once, for a weekend. Clare dropped her off at the porch with an awkward wave, said she'd be back Sunday afternoon. She didn't come inside, just helped Lily out of the car and handed her a small suitcase. Lily ran to me before the engine even turned off. She wrapped her arms around my waist like she used to, like nothing had changed, like children always remember where they were safe. She wore the lavender sweater, a little shorter on her now, sleeves creeping toward her elbows, but she wore it anyway. I made her pancakes. She helped me feed the birds. We picked wildflowers. We made a new storybook, this time with foxes and rivers and brave little girls who found their way back to the forest cottage where they were always loved. On Sunday, when Clare came to pick her up, she lingered by the steps. Lily hugged me tight, whispered in my ear, "Grandma, this was the best part of my year." Clare looked down. Then, very quietly, she said, "She talks about you all the time now." I nodded. "She always did. You just stopped listening." She didn't argue, just nodded back. Then they left, and I stood on the porch, watching the road curve away between the trees, sunlight glinting off the windshield as they disappeared around the bend. But this time, I didn't feel hollow. I felt whole. I went inside, sat by the fireplace, looked up at the photograph still hanging above the mantel, and I smiled. Because I knew the truth. Love doesn't need permission to be real. It doesn't expire with fashion. It isn't erased by silence. It is handmade, stitched into time. And no matter who tries to rewrite the story, love always finds its way back to the page. Even if it takes years. Even if it arrives, wrapped in quiet. Even if it simply returns, in the form of a child's arms, reaching out, without asking why you were never in the pictures. Thank you for listening to my story. It took me a long time to find the words, longer still to believe they mattered. Either way, call in one more time tonight. Virtual comfort, toward helpless, dulled. But if you've made it this far, if something in this story stirred something in you, then maybe, just maybe, we've both been seen. You see, stories like mine don't always make headlines. They don't come with drama that screams. They unfold in kitchens, in silent phones, in the ache of being left out of a photo or a life. But they're real, and they deserve to be told. Because being forgotten is not the same as being gone. And sometimes, the softest voice, the one they tried to curate out, becomes the one they remember most. If this story reminded you of someone you know, or something you've felt, or a silence you've carried, then I hope you'll do one thing. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories. This channel is where quiet women finally speak. Where mothers, grandmothers, and caretakers who've held it all together finally let it all out. Not in anger, but in clarity. Here, you'll find real stories of betrayal, of sacrifice, of quiet revenge. Told not to shame anyone, but to remember everything. Because wisdom doesn't age, it deepens. And revenge? Sometimes, it comes in the form of a knitted collar and a child's arms. So if you want more stories like this, stories that sit with you, stories you'll carry into your own still nights. Hit that subscribe button. Share it with a friend. Leave a comment if you'd like to tell your own. This is not just a channel, it's a place for the stories they thought would never be told. And I promise you this, we remember everything. And now, finally, so will they.